Can we be optimistic about the future? We can't be optimistic about the past. It's over and done with. I was in the shower. I'm in the shower, and my son, who's 9 years old, opens the door to ask this burning question: Papa, did we have ancestors on the Titanic? I said, well, I don't think so. Well, what about the Britannic? The Britannic is the Britannic, which is a sister ship also at the bottom of the sea. And I said, I don't think so. We're never going to have any ancestors on there. Why not? He said, which was a strange question. So later on, I asked my son, do you understand the difference between the past and the future? You know, if we dropped you off at some point out of a time machine, how could you tell whether you're in the past or the future? And he said, well, in the future, everybody's going to be smarter because there's going to be, there's going to be more knowledge. We're going to know more things. And I'm thinking, okay, well, there's going to be more history to learn in the future, so that makes some sense. But what kind of knowledge is he talking about? What does that mean? So I'm thinking, as a philosopher, of course, and that my son, he's going to follow in my footsteps, it sounds like, about something called physical determinism. And this is the idea that will seem familiar, but that also is going to seem strange. But as they worked out how the world works, it seemed like we live inside of a great big clock, a big honking clock, and all the gears are turning all the time, and we're in there. And that man there, Pierre-Simon Laplace, when he worked out the laws of probability about in the early 1800s, he said, if I knew where every particle in the universe was at any point in time, and I knew where it's headed and all the information about it, then I would know what's going to happen in the next moment, and the next moment, and the next moment, because it's going to go like this. And such knowledge would be able to see the whole future and the entire past of the universe at one time, as if it were a landscape spread out right in front of you. Well, we do think like that. The past, the present, the future, we live in the present. But there's a big question here. Are we actually moving forward in time? There is the idea that when we try to explain something, we go into the past. So if we are at the pool hall and it's your shot and you intend to hit the 4 ball in the pocket, but you accidentally hit the 8 and then you hit the 10 and the 8 ball goes in the pocket, you lose. And if you tell me, well, I had a bit of bad luck there. No, there's no luck involved. You hit the ball poorly. You hit the cue ball poorly and it hit the wrong ball, and it was all just a cascade of events, how it all worked out. And so there's no luck there. In fact, it may be that if we live in a universe that's physically determined, there's no such thing as luck. There's no such thing as chance. It's just our ignorance of what's going on. So, do we live in this clockwork universe? Okay, well, is it really like that? It seems like it because we can always explain things in terms of cause, effect, cause, effect, cause, effect, and we don't seem to have a problem. I ask my students sometimes, have you ever seen anything happen that wasn't caused to happen by something else? No, nobody's ever seen anything like that. Well, what do we do with that information? The idea is, when we get to the future, we're going to have one past behind us, if you think about it. I mean, we all agree that the Cowboys and the Kansas City Chiefs did not both win last year's Super Bowl. That does make sense, right? Well, is it possible that when we get to the future, like say next February, and it's Super Bowl is over, Super Bowl 58, and the Cowboys have won, there will be an inevitable, or at least explicable, past that we're going to be looking at. But that past is now in our future. So there's one past, but the past that we're going to have next February is going to be in our past then, but it's in our future now. So is there only going to be one past? Well, let's find out. Perhaps not. perhaps it isn't. Let's see here. Maybe the future is fixed, and maybe it's just an illusion that we're moving through. But the problem is that we like to think we have some control over the future. We make plans, and we're pretty much living towards the future at all times. Our hearts are beating, and every beat we move a little further along in time. And the deal is that seems like we can't have this thing called free will. Philosophers think a lot about this. How much in control are we? We get up every day, we move around, things happen. Are we the author of our own thoughts and intentions and so on? And it could be that if we live in this clockwork universe, we don't really have the kind of free will we like to think we have. That's a bit of a problem. Because if you are responsible for your decisions and actions, then you're responsible, and it's up to you to meet your obligations and so on. And that's going to tie in when people do good things and bad things. Well, what else could we say about that? Well, we could say that maybe we don't live in that universe. Maybe there's a little messiness to things. Maybe the universe is not a great big clock. And you could, if you like even yourself, you could study quantum physics and find out that down there at the bottom, when things get really, really small, it's not like that. And, particles have wave-like properties, and waves turn into particles when we look at them and so on. There's real indeterminism down there. There's real uncertainty about what's going on. It doesn't seem like it's cause effect. Things get messy. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe the world's not like this great big clock, or maybe it's an old clock, like it doesn't run as well anymore, like an old person, like me maybe. Or maybe the world's more like a cloud. So instead of clocks, we have clouds. Suppose it's a cloud of gnats, and of course you've run into one of those before, and it's a thing, it's a fuzzy, buzzy thing, but it's there, and it keeps changing all the time, and maybe the world's like that, perhaps. But if we think about it, that may not help us with our free will problem. So there are some choices here. We could look at it and say, well, is it like this? Are we like puppets, and we're being tugged this way and that. Something else is pulling the strings. Or are we like robots? So we're programmed. We have our hardwiring, our DNA and so on, and then we have our upbringing, and so we're sort of limited by all that. Or perhaps we're lautomobiles, as I call them. That is to say, we're like random things, chance. We're just driven this way and that by our impulses. Is that a possibility? It may not help. Well, let's think of it. Let's go back and think about time, because this is something I talk a lot about, and I'm very interested in time. I spend a lot of time thinking about it, the past, the present, the future. How do we deal with this? And we ask questions like, what is it, fundamentally? Is there an arrow of time? Yes, it always seems to be moving towards the future. We remember the past, we don't remember the future. Why is that? What's going on? Can we go back in the past? It doesn't seem like it. Why is that? Why not? Well, so I like to look at it like this, that the future doesn't exist. And I think that's good that it doesn't exist, because it allows us to have some control over the future, because it's not going to be anything till we get there, and it's going to be what we make of it. So I think of the present as a kind of nexus, that is to say, a sort of everything coming together of all the things that are now possible. They weren't possible a minute ago, and things that are no longer possible. The game is over, it's played, and the Cowboys won, we hope. It's done. And I like to think like that. So in the past, is it real? Well, it's real in one sense. It's not as real as the present, but the future does not exist at all. It isn't there. It isn't fixed what's going to happen. And I think there's some hope involved in that, of course, but I think that's a good thing to hope for. And I have a quote by a famous scientist, Freeman Dyson, who makes a good point that, in fact, the universe is running down. We know that. The energy in the universe degrades as it gets used. over time, and the disorder in the universe increases in a regular basis every day. But also order is coming into being at the same time. That is to say, we build things that are orderly. They're not falling apart every day, we're building new things. And the idea is that time in a way is speeding up, because as technology increases, it gets faster, it goes faster. And as we move through time in this expanding universe, just the very fact that it's getting bigger creates more possibilities. And the more possibilities there are, the more possibilities there are. It's a kind of thing that's picking up speed as we're going along. And so I go back to my philosopher's son and what he had to say about knowledge. We need to know more. We're going to need to know more in the future. There's going to be more past to study, that's for sure. So I suppose history teachers will have job security there. But it's like that for everybody. We need to know things. And so we've got to be smart, and we've got to create that kind of future, the one that we want to live in. So that's kind of how I look at it. So there probably won't be flying cars in our future. I'm just not convinced of that. I don't know about you. But here's how I look at it. I think of the future as something that we should be optimistic about, because we can't help it. We have to be. That is to say, optimism is not an attitude you have. It's not the character of someone who just is cheerful and, looking up all the time. It's a strategy. Optimism is a strategy. We are going to do something so that the future we live in down the road is going to be the one we want to live in. And we have the ability to do that. And I think about a strategy, for example, at the football game, when they do the coin toss at the beginning of the game. There's a bit of chance there, right? Maybe. I said there is no chance in this determined universe. So it doesn't really matter. As long as we have a strategy, we have some control. So for example, a few years ago, Bill Belichick, our favorite coach, right? He said, you know what? I think I've got a strategy about the way they do the coin toss. If we win the toss, we're not going to receive the ball. See, we can't control what's going to happen. If we live in a clockwork universe, the coin is going to do what it's going to do. It's determined, maybe even predetermined. And the conservation of angular momentum and the buffeting of air molecules and all the stuff that's involved physically in making that coin turn up heads or tails. We don't know what's going to turn up, so that's the element of chance, but that's the only one. Again, that's our ignorance, but it doesn't matter, because you got to have a strategy. And his strategy was, if we get the toss, we're going to kick, because I want to have an extra possession in the second half where I know I figured things out, and I think that's to our advantage. And everybody thought he was crazy, and pretty soon, yeah, that's a good strategy. Everybody's doing that. So we are going to be optimistic. We're going to think about the future, and we're going to try to make it one we want to live in. So thank you.